At my college graduation dinner, the one I paid for myself, with loans, working 2 jobs, my father raised his glass and said, "We're just so proud we could give both our kids everything they needed to succeed." I set down my fork. And I said, "Both of us? Then maybe you can explain where the $200,000 Grandpa left me actually went, because I have his trustee on the phone, and he'd like to know too." The whole table went quiet. My mother's wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. "Let me back up. My name is Camille Alvarez. I'm 26 years old, and my parents spent 8 years quietly draining the trust my grandfather left me for my education, handing it to my older brother, and letting me take out loans for a degree that was already paid for before I was born. They almost got away with it. The reason they didn't is a man named Arthur Weiss, and my grandfather's very good lawyer, and one line in a trust document my parents never read carefully enough. Let me tell you about my grandfather first, because he's the hero of this story even though he died when I was 14. His name was Emil. He came to this country with nothing, built a chain of hardware stores over 40 years, and sold them for a great deal of money late in his life. And Emil had watched his own son, my father, grow into a man Emil loved, but did not entirely trust with money because my father had a specific weakness. He loved my older brother Mateo, in the particular way that some parents love one child so completely that the other becomes furniture. Mateo was the golden one, charming, athletic, the boy who could do no wrong. I was 3 years younger and quiet and good at school and largely unnoticed, and Emil, who noticed everything, saw it happening. He saw that in our family, resources flowed toward Mateo like water downhill, and he decided to do something about it before he died. So Emil set up 2 trusts, one for Mateo, one for me, equal, $200,000 each, designated for education and to help us start our adult lives. And he made my father the trustee, because that's what you do, you name the parent. But here is the thing my grandfather did that saved me, the thing my father never fully registered in his grief and his greed. Emil named a second trustee, a co-trustee. His lawyer and old friend, Arthur Weiss, and the trust document required both trustees to approve any disbursement over $5,000. My father, I would learn, found this insulting. His own father not trusting him with his own children's money, and after Emil died. My father did what people do with a safeguard they were sent. He went to Arthur Weiss, charming and reasonable, and he got Arthur to agree to a simpler arrangement for the day-to-day. Arthur, elderly himself by then, and trusting my father. Signed a limited authorization letting my father handle routine educational expenses without a second signature for each one. That letter was the crack, and my father drove a truck through it. Here is what actually happened to my trust, which I pieced together only years later. Mateo went to an expensive private university. Full price, no aid. And Mateo's trust, his $200,000, was not enough, because Mateo also totaled 2 cars, and Mateo needed an apartment nicer than the dorms, and Mateo took a gap year in Europe that cost a fortune, and Mateo's tuition kept rising. So my father, trustee of both trusts, started using my trust to cover the overflow. A routine educational expense, he told himself, and told Arthur when Arthur occasionally asked, and Arthur, old, trusting, half-retired, didn't look closely. At the time I was ready for college, my $200,000 trust had $11,000 left in it, and my parents did not tell me. Instead, when I got into my state university, my mother sat me down and said, gently, that money was tight, and that I'd need to take out loans and work to pay for school, but that it would build character, and that they were so sorry they couldn't do more. My father nodded sadly, and I believed them. Why wouldn't I? I was 17. I didn't know I was an heiress being told she was poor, so I did it. I took out $60,000 in loans. I worked 2 jobs through college, barista in the mornings, restaurant at night. I missed things. I was tired for 4 years. And the entire time, I believed my parents were doing their best for me, and I felt guilty for the loans, as if needing an education were a burden I'd selfishly placed on them. Meanwhile, Mateo posted photos from Barcelona. I want to tell you how I found out, because it was an accident, and it's the kind of accident that changed a life. I was 24, 2 years out of school, and my grandmother, Emil's widow, my Nana, was moving into assisted living, and I was helping her pack. And in a box of Emil's old papers, I found the trust documents, both of them, mine and Mateo's. And I sat on the floor of my grandmother's half-packed apartment and read the words, the Camille Alvarez Educational Trust, $200,000, dated the year I was 11, and I could not breathe. I asked my Nana about it carefully. My Nana, who was old but sharp, and who had wondered for years why I'd struggled through college on loans, went very still, and then very angry in the quiet way of a woman who has just understood something ugly about her own son. Emil left you that money, she said. I was there. He left you exactly what he left Mateo, exactly. He was so careful to make it equal. He said to me, Rosa, I will not let them make Camille the invisible one. She took my hand. Where did it go, Camille? I didn't know yet, but I was going to find out. Here is what I did over the next year. First, I contacted Arthur Weiss. He was in his 80s, now retired. When I told him who I was and asked about my trust, there was a long silence on the phone, and then he said in the voice of a man realizing he'd been made an instrument of something, Your father told me those expenses were for you. He told me you were at private school. He told me. He stopped. Camille, I think I need to see the account records. I think I made a very serious mistake by trusting your father, and I think I owe you an accounting. As co-trustee, I have a legal duty to you, and I have failed it, and I intend to fix it. Arthur Weiss, 83 years old, became my fiercest ally. Because a co-trustee who realizes he's been deceived into breaching his fiduciary duty is a man with both a legal obligation and a personal fury to make it right. Second, Arthur pulled the complete records, which, as co-trustee, he had every right to do, and which my father could not stop. And there it was, in black and white. 8 years of disbursements from the Camille Alvarez Educational Trust, almost none of them for Camille. Tuition payments to Mateo's University, a payment to a European travel company, 2 car dealerships, an apartment complex in Mateo's college town. $189,000 of my education, spent on my brother, approved by my father under a letter he'd charmed out of a trusting old man. Third, I learned what my options actually were, and this is where the story turns from grief to leverage. Because draining a beneficiary's trust for an unauthorized purpose isn't a family disagreement. It's a breach of fiduciary duty, and depending on how it's done, it can be civil or criminal. My father had, as trustee, systematically converted my trust assets to benefit another person. Arthur, as the wrong co-trustee, could pursue it, and so could I as the beneficiary. I hired a lawyer, a trust litigator named Grace Ackefer, and she reviewed Arthur's records and said the sentence that reorganized my life. Camille, this is one of the clearer breaches I've seen because your grandfather built the trust so well. The 2-trustee structure means your father's own signature is on disbursements he had no authority to make unilaterally, and the paper trail shows exactly where the money went. He didn't just take it. He documented himself taking it. Emil, dead for 12 years, had reached out from the grave and protected me, not by stopping my father, but by making sure that when my father stole, he'd leave a perfect record of the theft. Now, the graduation dinner. Except it wasn't my college graduation, which had happened years earlier, paid for with my loans. It was Mateo's. Mateo, at 29, had finally finished a graduate degree, funded. I now knew, partly with my money, and my parents threw him a lavish dinner, and I was invited because I was still, at that point, pretending I didn't know. I planned to handle it privately. I want you to understand that. Grace had advised a quiet legal process, but I sat at that dinner and I watched my parents beam at Mateo, and I listened to my father stand and raise his glass and say, "We're just so proud we could give both our kids everything they needed to succeed." Both, he said, both. And something in me that had worked 2 jobs and gone to bed, exhausted for 4 years, while believing I was a financial burden, simply refused to stay quiet. Both of us, I said. Then maybe you can explain where the $200,000 Grandpa left me actually went, because I have his trustee on the phone and he'd like to know too. And I did. Arthur Weiss was on the phone, on speaker in my hand, because Arthur had asked me, begged me, almost to let him be there when I said it. My father's face when he heard Arthur's voice come out of that phone is something I will keep for the rest of my life. "Hello, Daniel," Arthur said to my father, across a restaurant out of a phone. "It's Arthur. I've seen the account records now. All 8 years of them. I trusted you, and you used me to steal from your own daughter, and I am here to tell Camille and everyone at that table that Emma left her $200,000 exactly equal to Mateo's. That you spent $189,000 of it on your son. I have the records. I've given them to Camille's attorney. And as co-trustee, I'll be joining her action, because I have a duty to her that I failed for 8 years, and I intend to spend whatever time I have left making it right." My mother had gone white. Mateo had set down his drink and was staring at his plate. And my father, charming, reasonable, 40 years of never being questioned, said, "Camille, this is not the place. You don't understand the full context." "I understand that I took out $60,000 in loans," I said, "to pay for a degree Grandpa funded before I was 11. I understand that Mom told me money was tight and it would build character. I understand that Mateo went to Barcelona on my education." "What context am I missing, Dad? Which part of that gets better with context?" "Here is how it ended, and it ended mostly in my favor, though not cleanly, because real life isn't clean. The legal case was strong. Emil had built it strong without knowing it. Faced with Arthur's records and Grace's filing, and the near certainty of losing, my father settled rather than face a trust litigation trial and possible criminal referral. He was ordered, in effect, to make me whole. The $189,000, restored, plus my legal costs. He didn't have it in cash. He had to remortgage the house and liquidate his own retirement to pay it, which is its own kind of justice. The man who spent my future funding Mateo's had to spend his own to give mine back. My $60,000 in loans paid off from the restored trust. For the first time in my adult life at 25, I owed nothing. I cannot describe what that felt like. Lighter than I'd been since I was 17. Mateo, I'll be honest about Mateo because it's complicated. Mateo hadn't known. That was the thing that gutted me and, in a strange way, saved our relationship. Mateo had genuinely believed our parents were paying for him out of their own money. He had no idea it was mine. When he understood, he was horrified. He spent the years since trying to pay me back his share directly, out of guilt, and I've told him he doesn't have to, because he was a child in that machine too, just the favored one instead of the erased one. We're okay, Mateo and I not close. But okay. The parents built the wall between us. It turned out we could take some of it down ourselves. My parents did not come out okay, and I've made my peace with that. My father and I don't speak. My mother has tried. In the way of someone who wants forgiveness without accounting, and I've told her the same thing every time. I'll talk about the future when you're honest about the past, and she never can be. Because being honest about the past would mean saying out loud that she watched her daughter struggle for 4 years and chose to let it happen. She'd rather lose me than say it. So she has. Arthur Weiss and I stayed close until he died, 18 months after that dinner. He came to see me made whole. He insisted on being in the room when the settlement funded, when the loans were paid, and he told me, near the end, "Your grandfather was the finest man I ever knew, and I nearly let his last kindness be stolen. Thank you for letting an old man fix his worst mistake." I gave the eulogy at his funeral, Emil's daughter-in-law, my Nana, sat beside me. I think about my grandfather constantly. Man who saw, while he was still alive, exactly how his family would try to erase his granddaughter, and who built, quietly, patiently, in the language of trustees and disbursement clauses, a machine to stop it, and set it running, and died trusting it would hold. It held. 12 years after his death, one line in a document he'd thought carefully about, 2 trustees, both signatures required, reached across all that time and gave me back my life. My father raised a glass and said he'd given both his children everything they needed. My grandfather actually had. My father just spent 12 years hoping I'd never find out which one of them was telling the truth.